show, we're going to be talking about change, as in a sex change, for instance.
Transitioning. Call me Kate.
We were thinking about a topic, and both of us have done traveling extensively and done several different things in our lives, and really what brought upon the genesis of this conversation is, why don't more people do what they dream of? And what does it actually take to go forth and live what you actually want to do, as opposed to a job or, working the job. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at our own experiences, what we've done, and really what we think it takes, and what other people can do to experience the changes in their lives that they dream of, basically. And, I'll start by talking about some of the things that I've done, just general overview. After college, Jen and I, my wife, we just wanted to get the hell out of Dodge. We wanted to do something different. We were at Florida State, where we saw the Bush v. Gore election and just the catastrophic breakdown of government in the most powerful superpower in the world, the United States, right? This is what I had grown up with. This is the best country in the world, America, and so there was this sense that up until then of just the pure dominance of our country. And in my mind, that really put a question of, well, why are we the best? How could we be in a country where a state Supreme Court decides an election, how the power of the electoral process goes out of the hands of the people, not even the electoral college who represent the people, but the judicial branch. And so that really spurred me to look at other things to do. So that's when we started traveling. We got out of the country and started traveling the world. But since then, if it's possible, if it's feasible, we always try to do something different than the options that were presented in front of us. And more times than not, we've been happy with the results. I mean, I've never said, holy shit, I wish I'd never, traveled through Thailand or something like that. I've never had that thought. There have been times where things didn't go as well as I had hoped for, almost dying in the largest tsunami in the last 100 years. Not quite, but, not being far off, almost being blown up by Islamic fundamentalist militant terrorists. That sucked, but I'm still here.
You weren't at the market when the bomb went
off.
Right.
So there's very few regrets I have for the things that I decided to do. And so it's always a question of, it feels better to take the risk than it does to never imagine it, never go through that, never realize it.
Yeah. I think the reason people don't pursue it a lot is because change is hard a lot of times, and change is scary. Yeah. And change requires sacrifice. If you want to leave your job, you're leaving an income stream. If you want to leave where you live, or where you grew up, you're leaving the network that you've built there, without even really having to try. You're born and raised in a place, and you naturally know and meet people throughout. So if you leave that and start over somewhere else, it requires investment.
Right.
That's generally what it requires. If you leave a job, you got to now go out and find a different one, unless you have one offered to you. If you leave a place, you got to make a new network, new connections, new job. If you travel, it requires you spending money, getting immunizations, getting your passport, going through customs, going to less secure or safe places a lot of the time. So the universe is a vast, indifferent place. And the way I heard it expressed once, I really like, says the world is full of sharp edges. Yeah. And you can always bump into one or have one bumped into you. And so there's that. I think everybody has that knowledge at their core. Today could be the day you get hit by a car. Today could be the day your house burns down. And so staying with what's known and familiar kind of helps you not think about that.
Right. And one of the things, and we've been talking about David Simon lately in The Wire and Treme, and really good television
how hot Kim Dickens is.
Yes. And
the deep issues, folks.
And I was just watching the first episode of the second season, and it's where one of The Wire. Okay. I apologize. And one of the Avon Barksdale crew's young up and coming couriers. I forget his name, but he's the kid that shot the other kid. I don't know.
Oh, the guy who looks like a young LL Cool J.
Yeah, who always wears the hairnet and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, in the first episode of the second season, it's his job to go pick up a rental car from Philadelphia and take it to a place and strip it down and get the drugs out of the car. And Stringer Bell, being as smart as he is, has someone shadowing him the whole time and writes his mileage down, is just really on top of him. But there's a scene where they're going down the New Jersey Turnpike, and this kid who's never been out of Baltimore goes, "Hey man, the radio, it's dying." And the older drug mule guy in the driver's seat was like, "The hell are you talking about? The radio's dying." He's like, "It's dying. The station's going out." And he's like, "Put on a Philly station." The kid goes, "There's stations in Philadelphia and they're different than Baltimore?" And he's like, "You've never driven far enough to where the radio fades away." And I think that's a perfect analogy for a lot of what people do, whether it's literally never leaving their town or figuratively never going outside of that kind of safety buffer of what they know.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's really difficult. And I think what holds people there is things, whether it's people or things. That for me is probably the most difficult thing to affect change in terms of getting up and moving, and is really how many roots you have.
Yeah.
And whether those roots are good, healthy roots like family, some sort of spiritual nurturing, some sort of hobby or avocation that keeps you interested on a regular basis. Again, another David Simon show, Treme. Everyone talks in the show about how great it is to live in New Orleans. And a town like New Orleans has so many things that keep people rooted there. The culture, the traditions, the food, the music. And not to say those things aren't amazing. I've been there several times and I love all those things. But, when you build more things into your life, intentionally or inadvertently, you get locked into that. You get locked into this life you've built for yourself. And like you said it, you have to not only make new attachments, new connections, new networks when you go other places, but you have to literally uproot yourself from those commitments. And some of them are debts and responsibilities and kind of more negative, but just as difficult or even more difficult is extricating yourself from the people who you care about. The people you love, the commitments you love, the things you love to do in your area. And that's always been one of my biggest problems, is when I talk to my family, they still feel like, hey, why the hell aren't you, 2 miles down the road like your sisters are? Mm-hmm. And all my sisters joke around about how, since I'm the baby boy, and they made my life fucking miserable, they say it's not really true. I love them and I had a great upbringing, that, it was so horrible growing up with 4 older sisters that I moved fucking halfway around the world. Yeah. And that's the ongoing running joke in the family. And I mean, some of it's true. It's nice to get away, and it didn't really matter where. It could have been a state over, but it happened to be a half a world over.
Guam and Saipan.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it goes back to our evolutionary roots. I mean, when you're in the cave is a known quantity. The cave is safe. Right. Outside the cave is death. Everything new, when you go back to the origins of our species, represents potential, in a lot of cases, probable death.
Yeah.
That new berry, toxic. Go into the woods, tigers. Go down go into the plains, wolves. I mean, like, everything new represented danger, an unknown quantity. So if you could find a place that wasn't dangerous, you stay there, because the risk of your, very apparent mortality goes down a little bit. Mm. Now, people were hunter-gatherers, they were required to move a little bit anyway, but you find those routes, you find those migration points, and you stay in that route. So I think a lot of that is probably still buried underneath our layer of civilization, where it's like, okay, I mean, look at how they used to draw old maps. This is unknown territory. What did they draw? Maybe cool stuff is here? No, there be dragons. There be dragons. Like, you can find plenty of old seafaring maps drawn by cartographers who knew their shit, and it'd literally be, okay, unknown space, here be dragon. Like, that's how we perceive the world as an essentially defenseless species. We don't got cool teeth. We're not fast. We can't jump real high. We're not strong. You know, I think probably 4 or 5 squirrels could take down your average linebacker. You know, all we have is our brain and our opposable thumbs. Yeah. And so you got to think your way out of problems and out of danger. An animal has instincts, but they don't have reasoning. So they can't go, okay, I'm going to run from this over to here, but this might not be a good idea because that, like, get away from the immediate threat and then dead.
Yeah. You know, so they work on a binary system like fight or flight. And
full, hungry, danger, safe, tired, awake.
Right. And I mean, going back to Plato's analogy of the cave, I mean, it's interesting because the person who says, hey, there's shit outside of this cave, what happens to that person? He gets the shit beaten out of him because the people don't want to hear that there's something other than the cave.
Yeah.
And that's the amazing part of that is you can live this life that is rewarding and you've uprooted yourself. You've cut these ties to your location. You've traveled, whether it's figuratively, you know, you've done something outside of what is normal, or you've actually literally geographically gone to another place. You've accomplished what you want to do, and then you go back and you tell everyone, and they're like, go fuck yourself. We don't care. We don't want to hear about it. I mean,
nobody wants to see your vacation photos.
Thomas Mann wrote about it, and you can never go home again. You can't go home again. You outgrow the place where you grew up in if you leave there. I think
that you can go back, but it just happens to be different and you're different. So it's not the home you had in your mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you see it a lot in war stories, whether novels, movies, TV shows, when a guy gets injured or gets off the line and he's away from the troops for any number of days. When he comes back, it's a different group of people and they treat him differently. And he hasn't survived through Bastogne or Fallujah, and they're no longer treated the same way. And yeah, home is the same way. You leave for a year or half a lifetime, you go back and quite literally you're different, they're different, and you're not going back to the same place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that prospect scares a lot of people too. I mean, I remember a guy I grew up with, I won't say his name, but when we were in high school, senior year, he started working for the DMV, and he friended me on Facebook years later. And I think it was like 10, 12 years after high school. And he was still working for the DMV. And then on like the pictures of like his Super Bowl party and stuff, it was the exact same people that he was hanging out with in high school. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was like, holy shit, I know that guy, that guy, that guy, that girl, that girl, that girl. And I was like, and listen, it's not that that's a good or a bad thing. If it works for that particular person, fine.
Exactly.
I mean, you're probably not going to be blown up by an Islamic terrorist group in a Guam market or a Indonesian marketplace if you don't ever leave Federal, Washington.
Right.
Probably not. You might miss out on a lot of the attendant magic that's out there in the world. But I mean, everybody's got their own limitations. I don't like the water anymore. I loved the water when I was a kid. Almost drowned a couple of times. That killed my love for being in the water. And then having seen Jaws at the age of like 7 always made me terrified of sharks to this day. Like, they give you an example. Like, I was home in Seattle a couple weeks ago and swimming in Lake Washington briefly. Like, practice my dive, jump out in the water, cool, sit on the dock, had my my feet dangling in the water, and I looked down and I realized the water was so dark I couldn't even see my legs in the water, and I just whoop, yanked them out. And I was like, it's a lake. It's a freshwater lake. Like, there's no probably anything in there. Mm-hmm. But it just hit that caveman, like, lizard brain said, if you don't see something, something could come for you and you wouldn't know. Yeah, and I was like, fuck that.
I'm still at some level, if not a functional level, a kind of like caveman, reptilian level, whatever you want to call it. Like you said, afraid of the dark. I mean, to where if my foot's hanging out of the bed, something's going to fucking touch it. And as an adult, it's more like a big cockroach is going to lay eggs in my toe, and I'm going to get some toe jam fungus cockroach babies in there, as opposed to some monster. That's the monster. Yeah. We know what the monsters are, and
parasites are monsters,
right? And God,
parasites.
I was reading, I think it was Infinite Jest, which I did not finish. I'm not going to even fucking pretend.
Yeah.
But I got through several hundred pages.
I don't think David Foster Wallace finished it either. To be honest with you. He just walked away at some point.
Yeah.
And some poor copy editor found it and was like, all right, I guess we're publishing this.
And footnotes. We'll do that too. Sure.
Yeah, footnotes.
But I think it was, I'm almost positive because they were talking about the main character's brother, who was a football player and going out for trials for, I think, the New Orleans Saints. And they were talking about the bad roaches, the German roaches, you dirty Germans. And
Sorry, we are dirty.
Yeah. How the German roaches or Germanus roaches, whatever they are, if they land on infants, they can secrete an enzyme that will make infants go blind. And so literally this is a fact. And
German cockroaches.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The bad cockroaches, not the like palmetto bugs that are in every subtropical location and desert and whatever. Jesus. But so, and that was the thing is a lot of people in like the 9th Ward or the 7th Ward or in a lot of the more impoverished areas of New Orleans and wherever in the country, if they didn't have proper sanitation, the vector problem would come in and babies would go blind from literally cockroach enzyme.
Would they have to do it on their eyes or just on their bodies somewhere?
I think it has to go on their eyes, but here's the kicker is infant eye crud is like fucking heroin to cockroaches.
Really?
And so they love that shit. They just, it's tasty.
Just nummy.
Biscuits and gravy all day long. And so and
they threw babies on the baby maker.
Yeah.
Or baby feeders. I always fuck that up. Robert Kelly's great line in his comedy special. Oh, that's terrifying.
Yeah. So, you don't have to necessarily think there are dragons out there. There's plenty of scary shit out there. And your kind of rational or irrational fear of the water, which prevents you from doing certain things. Mine is pretty rational, is I don't want to get my head cut off by a rusty fucking knife. And
on camera, sent to my loved ones. Yeah.
Right. Or burned alive. And
no drowning, no burning, no torture, no execution, please. Like in bed at 85, 95. That's the dream.
Yeah. Yeah. If I haven't died from a drug overdose yet, I think it's just going to be, dying in bed at some point in my geriatric years.
Yeah. You got the motorcycle shit out of the way with a non-fatal result. So that's out of your system. You got the drugs out of your way with a non-fatal result. Mm-hmm. So you've already been through a couple of the big ones.
Yeah.
Now we both have to conquer our addiction to food at some point.
I'm not going to take up lawn darts or anything soon. So it's just eating healthfully and not developing diabetes in my late 30s or early 40s and then just coasting through to cancer years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll have those celebratory cigars tomorrow anyway. But
sure.
it's that's the thing. I mean, the life is not guaranteed. People I've read, I don't know if it's true, I would assume it is, you regret the things you didn't do more than the things you did.
Right.
Because the what if game will drive you fucking nuts.
Yeah.
And there's no reason not to, within reason. But the thing is, when it comes to the hard work and the sacrifice required for any meaningful change is a real thing. And it's given short shrift in a lot of popular media that even the stuff that talks about it, like, they'll interview an athlete. Oh, hey, how'd you develop that 3-point shot? Well, I worked hard. And then it'll be like a 10-second blurb in the conversation. They move on. What you don't see behind that is the hundreds and hundreds of hours spent. Like, hard work is monotonous. It takes a long time to show even incremental gains.
Yeah.
And so people can talk about hard work, but I think the vast majority of people don't have a concept of what consistent hard work is. It's monotonous and time consuming to raise a family, but it's not working in the fucking coal mine. Right. Changing a diaper is not hard. Going to work 40 hours a week is not hard. It takes up a lot of time, which is annoying and exhausting, but it's not really hard. Hard work where you just work to the point of exhaustion and keep working used to be just a given for subsistence in this country. If anybody who's ever spent any time doing actual work on a farm, and I mean farm work, I don't mean riding a combine around in the fields and then baling hay. Like, you go out there and swing a fucking scythe and bale some hay by hand. Oof. Try doing that shit for 2-3 hours in the sun. Now try doing it all day in the sun. And then when that work isn't there, you got to milk the cows, you got to feed this, and you got to dig ditches, and you got to build or repair a fence line, and you got to cut down trees and haul rocks and the water. And I mean, brutally hard, back-breaking work used to be a prerequisite for life.
Yeah.
And we are fortunate, in a lot of places in the world it still is.
Oh, absolutely.
You see those famous National Geographic photos of women in India carrying, water baskets on their head for 10 miles. That's just what they've got to do to get water. And it's not possible for them, for whatever reason, to either move closer or have water nearby. That's just what you got to do.
Right.
And so human beings are very adaptable when you have to do things. Okay, maybe it's not fun, but you just get used to it. But at our core, beyond that, is pain avoidance. So if you have the option to be, have a general sense of dissatisfaction about your life, but it's got all the creature comforts, you don't like your job, but okay, you make enough money, you can travel every year or so, take a nice little vacation, you got your Netflix, you got, this, you got a decent car, those things can obscure what you really want or make it so that you don't go for those things.
Right.
There's that book you and I both read by Felix Dennis called How to Get Rich, where he likens having a job to a cocaine habit, because you get that drip of money every 2 weeks or every week or once a month or whatever. But that money's coming in, and anything that fucks with that money is a risk. On top of that, people generally don't prepare for life that well.
Right.
3% of our parents' generation, I don't know what the generation after the baby boomers is, but they're right on the tail end of that. My parents were both born in the late 50s.
Yeah, that's definitely baby boomer.
Yeah, 3% of that generation has prepared adequately for retirement. 3%. That's insane.
Yeah.
I'd imagine the ratio is even lower with our generation, because we were the generation raised by the prior one.
Right.
So those people aren't fiscally responsible. They're probably not going to have fiscally responsible offspring. Except in those cases where somebody, was the child of like profligate parents, and was like, not me, it's never going to happen to me. Like how, the children of addicts end up being teetotalers and genetically predisposed to either generally follow in their footsteps or fall on the extreme other end of the spectrum.
Right. So
there needs to be a more honest accounting of what it takes to have meaningful change. People just say like, oh, you can just, I think because everybody's got to struggle with their own stuff. It's not really addressed honestly. You and I have gone through that in our entrepreneurial endeavors, where it's just one thing after another, and some of it's self-inflicted and a lot of it is externally inflicted. And it's like, why do you put up with this? Well, because the juice is worth the squeeze. You can make, in the case of the things that we have going, 20 times the money per year that you could work in the job you had previously. It's worth the risk. It's worth the heartache, because if and when it pays off, the rewards are you don't have to do that other shit ever again.
Right.
Or do it only in the context that you want it to.
Sure.
So if the one option is you bust your ass for a couple of years and you risk everything you have and it doesn't pan out and you just go back to your old life, that's a slam dunk choice for me. But we also happen to be young and strong and able to work. If your situation is different, neither of us have kids. Neither of us want to have kids. So that's different. If you're 50 and you've got a couple of kids and you realize you're dissatisfied with your life, well, the kids still got to be fed.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that we haven't really addressed in terms of that locking yourself into your environment is children more than anything else keep people planted to where they are. Mm-hmm. And it's almost genetically the case. It's a predisposition for human evolution. And, you see it, the real pretty girls who develop early, they're the ones who aren't going to New York City to pursue their acting careers. They're the ones who are in, Topeka, Kansas with 3 kids. And,
by the time they're 28.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it isn't always it depends on what you want. Everything is subjective and everything is based on personal preference. But if that's not what you want, to be tied into being the head of household with a couple kids, then it's unfortunate for those people who get locked into that situation early, because that is the anchor that is keeping you in place, because for the next 18 years, that's it. That's what you're doing.
I think that gets used, I would say subconsciously a lot of the time, but not as an excuse, but just as a reason to avoid going for the stuff that could blow up in your face. Because having kids isn't going to blow up in your face. I mean, unless the kid is born severely handicapped or disabled in some way. It's people have done this for tens of thousands of years. You know how the process is going to go, and that becomes an easy justification for why you don't do things. Oh, we can't go there because kids. We can't spend money on this because kids. I can't pursue this dream because kids. And I think for a lot of people, it becomes not a cop-out, but a reason, like I said, not to go for it.
Right.
And if that's what you want to do, fine. I just don't want to hear any bitching about it later. It's probably the most important decision you'd ever make in your life is whether you want to have a kid or not.
Right.
It's one of the easiest things to do, whether you're trying to or not.
Yeah, and it's probably a decision that on the whole, the least amount of planning goes into across the spectrum in terms of major life decisions.
Which is such a human thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's the biggest decision you could ever fucking make, and people just do it like it's no big thing. And then they get 10 years, 12 years, 15 years in, 2 years, 6 weeks in, whatever, and like, oh, this sucks. Tough shit. I don't want to hear any fucking complaints because you made the decision. Now you deal with it. If people aren't, now mistakes happen, you know, if you're young or inebriated or whatever, fine. But we live in a country where you can have an abortion, and if that's against your religion, tough shit. Have a different religion.
Yeah.
Nobody is going to, well, hopefully nobody's going to hold a gun to your head in this country and make you have a kid. You know, hoping no honor killings are at stake. But I mean, the society isn't built to handle that well either. I mean, we emphasize abstinence over proper protection, this being still a predominantly religious country. We have the most fucked up attitude towards sex, I think, of pretty much any Western civilized nation, where we have this obsession with sex and we don't deal with it in a healthy way.
Right.
You know, not like sex is unpopular anywhere else in the world, but you look at the Scandinavian countries where there's tons of maternity leave and free health care. And if you want an abortion, it's easy to get. And there's no emphasis on marriage just because you want to be with somebody. So there's this puritanical streak where, you know, don't have sex until you're married, don't drink until you're 21. But then after you hit that point, there's no sense of responsibility. Says, go nuts, get married, have kids. You're 21, drink until you black out every night. Nobody's going to care until it becomes a problem for other people. And even, you know, if you have a kid young and you're unable to take care of it, society's not going to help you. There's no good system, social safety net for young unwed mothers. Good luck getting prenatal care or support or subsidized child care. It's so hard to do those things anyway. And it's so easy to just not get yourself knocked up. I mean, it's super easy. So I don't know. I mean, it's a whole twisted ball of shit that comes from a large part of our attitude about sex. I think it was a society that was just like, hey, have sex if you want, be safe about it. Don't have a kid until you're ready to. If that was the overarching message, it'd be a lot different.
Yeah, when abstinence in general as a hard line
doesn't work.
Yeah, doesn't work. And because it's the devil's in the detail, it's about the nuance. You can't.
Well, people want to have sex. The end.
Right.
They're going to.
Yeah.
People want drugs, and they're going to get them. It's
Right.
like, how do you deal with that? How do you regulate that as a society?
So it's about the education. And if you're telling people indefatigably you cannot do this thing, and then there's no room for explanation or education of, well, if you do this thing, here's a good way to do it. Here's a better way to do it.
Yeah.
And that's
it should be when you do this thing, because it is going to happen.
Right.
I would say the percentage of people who make it to marriage as virgins in this country has got to be under 10%.
Yeah. Especially for, the Gen Y internet generations.
Yeah.
It's almost a
It's
given.
human nature. And
Right.
we're wired by nature to start popping kids out about 15, 16. Because back in the day when those impulses got built into us, or there's imperatives, not impulses, your average lifespan was like 30 years old.
Right. And the idea of adolescence is a modern convention.
Yeah.
There was not adolescence in the 1750s. It was
adolescence is a luxury.
Right.
You're working on the farm from the time you were 8.
Right.
Yeah.
You're a child, and even then, until Upton St. Clair and other kind of journalistic pioneers really identified how shitty the working conditions for children were. It was by and large just accepted that children were working. What we were talking about, Snowpiercer, and there was that scene,
Winter Train,
right? There was that scene where did all the children go? They're working in the little tiny areas between the gears.
Yeah.
But I mean, we had a conversation, and I know obviously, you've got chimney sweepers and you've got children who worked in the coal mines, but there was something you had talked about. Powder monkeys. Yeah. Talk about that.
It was a tradition in navies for a long time, specifically in the British Navy. Once the advent of gunpowder enabled the mounting of giant cannons on ships, well, in their gun ports, it was hard to get access to them to load them up with powder. So they had very tight quarters. So who could fit in there? Children. So they used to have 5, 6-year-old boys called powder monkeys. So their sole job was to run gunpowder from the magazine in the ship's stores up to the guns and help load them. Yeah. And so very high mortality rate. A lot of them got blown up or disfigured. Admiral Nelson, arguably the most famous figure in British naval history, started off as a powder monkey.
Right.
Won the Battle of Trafalgar. I can't remember the name of the ship. I think it was like the Reliant or the Invincible or something. But I mean, it was a long and honored and proud tradition. It wasn't looked at as like, oh my God, the children. It was, we're at war. We need to survive. Literally all hands on deck.
Right. So it has a better sense of honor and duty and kind of nationalist pride than like a chimney sweep boy who.
Well, even then, that's function of survival. Like you need to eat. Your family doesn't have enough food. What do you do to get food? You got to get money. Can you get work? Okay, well, you're going to go work if you want to eat.
Right.
I mean, the modern constructs of child abuse and child endangerment it's purely a modern luxury.
Right.
I mean, I think very few people have ever had kids just because they wanted to. The imperative is there because it's a necessity for the survival of the race.
Right. I mean, several countries now still have it to where the more children you have, the more wealthy you are because of you're able to support them.
Right. Same reason you have a bunch of wives in Middle Eastern culture. It's like, as you're able to support more wives, you can have more wives. And that's a mark of honor because look how rich I am because of all these people, this caravan of hungry mouths I got dragging behind me that I'm able to maintain. Just like being fat used to be a mark of success. Like I can afford more food than I need to live. That's the ultimate harbinger of success, or the mark of success, when the majority of the world dies from malnutrition or privation or lack of whatever.
Now there are 350-pound 12-year-olds in Tennessee with diabetes and who are malnourished because they're eating combos and Twizzlers and Mountain Dew all day long.
Yeah. Well, that's a form of a comfort in the routine too. It's like life is hard, life is a struggle, and then you die. That's the reality that everybody's born with. As soon as you're between like 3 and 10 years old, you get acquainted with the concept of death. And most kids, the question is, so Sparky died? Yes. Will you die? Yes. Grandpa? Yes. Me? Yes. Everything dies. And people try to protect kids from that now in a way that was never even a consideration even 100 years ago.
It's a bit ridiculous now.
Well, we're so removed from death. That's the thing. Like you don't have to see it ever in this country if you don't want to, unless like you're part of a car wreck where people die.
Right.
And it used to be death was everywhere. You had to kill to eat. So that's death right there. You teach a kid how to hunt, how to kill, how to skin an animal, how to dress it out, how to treat it, how to cure it, how to prepare the meat. And it's not like it was done in a callous or a cruel way, though I'm sure it was done that way sometimes. Like this is necessary for survival. So it wasn't, I think getting that knowledge early in the correct delivery method is good for you and in a way necessary for you to be able to relate to the world, because the world is eventually, in the end, nothing but death. As John Maynard Keynes, famous economist, said, in the long run, we're all dead.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a fun way of talking about how pointless economics is. As you just stretch the timeline out long enough, it's irrelevant to my personal lifespan.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at Neil deGrasse Tyson, try to decode the chronological length of the universe for the layperson, someone who's not an astrophysicist, and in terms of understanding how inconsequential and insignificant the human race, not just you or I or a single person, but the entirety of human existence is he made a cosmic calendar, big elaborate graphics and all that shit and yada yada yada. But he had 12 months, and for the first 11 months there were, you know, cosmic events. No living beings. Earth only really came into existence and in that cosmic calendar in October or November. And then the 11th hour of the 31st day of December on that calendar was when man came into being. So we represent less than one day in the entire universe, as opposed to everything else which has happened in terms of tracing back to the cosmic radiation we can see, the traces back of the Big Bang, to the expansion of the universe, formation of stars, formation of planets, M-class planets that will sustain life, and then us, and the last day of the last month of the last hour, there we are. And so that's the entirety of humanity, and it really, I think, is a way to put into perspective just how fucking insignificant we are.
Yeah, I mean, the species is young, the planet is young, the solar system is young compared to the overall life of the universe. And science gets too complex in a hurry for me to even be able to grasp it. I mean, I'm not an uneducated man. I've got degrees, you've got degrees, we've got high-level intellectual experience. But the fact that there's something like 32 dimensions, I mean, I can barely conceive and operate in 3 dimensions, let alone yet the 4th time, which I'm not really sure how that works. Is it like the 4th wall? And, you know, quantum string theory and high-level theoretical physics and like what a quark actually is. And I mean, understanding the world.
Fermions and.
Yeah, I mean, it's the world is an endless mystery. I mean, there's not, I don't know if they'll, certainly not in our lifetimes, there'll never be a third of what's out there figured out. Why do we need sleep? Well, we know the brain like washes out toxins of some kind that build up for some reason while you're awake. Why do we have self-destructing brains? They're just wired that way. We'll figure it out at some point if we live long enough as a species. But I mean, just basic shit like that, we don't know. And it's staggering and it's scary. To know that your life could be snuffed out at any minute by space debris or a plane crash or a house fire or a car crash, and you could be gone. Well, at least football's on, you know? Right.
And on top of that, a little anecdote for something that happened last night when I went to the dog park to run my husky lab and get the hell out of the house and get some exercise. There's this guy there, typical, I want to fucking flex my nuts and show you how great I am, stranger who just is compelled to tell you all these great things that they've done. And we all know these people. The person who, regardless of what you say in response to what they say, they're just waiting to say that next thing, which is going to invariably be better and bigger. And this fucking guy, first of all, I have nothing against fat people. You know, I'm not a fattest, but this guy was like 500 pounds, just like real, like uncomfortable,
morbidly obese.
Right. Just like looked like he was laboring for every breath. And he was talking about going to Monaco and doing these salvage expeditions in Italy and in these areas around Venice where they were looking for gold and working with National Geographic to do this and that and, you know, just all this shit. And I just don't, it just all has escaped me because it was worthless, you know, flotsam. And the one thing that resonated, and I know this is coming from someone who lacks so much credibility, but he was saying that he worked for the government and was in the military, which I have to assume he was several hundred pounds smaller to pass a military fitness test. But he said that all the military bases across the country and the world are preparing for some sort of world-ending tsunami or event that's going to happen in 2017. And he was talking about
nice that they can predict natural disasters with that kind of specificity now,
right?
Considering they can't get the weather right more than about 40% of the time.
And that's the thing where I was like, yeah, well, come on, there's no way to know that. But evidently, what he was saying is, you know, they're storing food and putting in solar paneling and digging wells. And of course, this guy is full of so much shit. It's incredible. Yet, I can't get it out of my brain. And so like in the background,
but
it's
what
like,
if it's true though?
but what if it's true?
Yeah.
And so there's that just constant itch. And I think that goes into that nesting instinct of, well, we got to prepare for something. We got to build up and protect and collect. And I mean, we live in a country now where, and it's part of a mental illness and it's part of a obsessive compulsive condition, but hoarding is like an unbelievably postmodern disease where,
well, it's honestly a natural response to the chaos of the world, like, because it's an ability to exert control. An eating disorder, getting a lot of tattoos, like anything that you can exert control over is kind of a response to the uncontrollability of the world you live in. You can't control where you're born. You can't control the government. You can't control what food is available or not available. Most things in life are completely out of your control. Can't control the fact that there's a siren going by while we're recording a radio show. Like, dude, it's out of your control. So a lot of disorders like that, and a lot of honestly everyday behavior is in response to that.
Addiction.
I work, I go home, I watch football, I do heroin, I go to bed. Like, these things are things you can control. You can control what goes into your body, what goes on your body, tattoo wise, clothing wise, what have you. And so I think that's it's a fairly modern phenomenon because we have the luxury of time to think about shit now, where it used to be, unless you had a great patron or you were born into a rich family, your life was root hog or die until you died. Retirement is a thoroughly modern concept. You worked until you couldn't, and then your kids took care of you until you died, which wasn't very long afterwards. And that was the world for thousands of years.
Right.
So, and for me, that's what makes it, the conclusion for me is that why wouldn't you go for this stuff? You're going to die. You're going to die. I'm going to die. 100 billion people in the lifetime of this planet have died. Everybody who's alive today is going to die. They're going to probably be able to start extending the lifespan dramatically here in the next 50 to 100 years. But that person will still die. So why wouldn't you go for what you want? Why wouldn't you go through temporary sacrifice to try to get something better for longer? It's simple math for me. Okay, work really hard now in exchange for a lot better stuff sooner, as opposed to work for 30, 40 years, which you're not guaranteed to live.
Right. And
hope that you have enough to retire on to play golf until you die. I mean, it's unfathomable to me. I've always wanted to work for myself, and now having worked for myself for a few years, there's definitely ups and downs, but I've had that example in my family. Like my uncle being one of the biggest electrical contractors in Washington State. He's worked for himself for 25 years now.
Okay.
And he still works hard, but the rewards he's gotten along the way, houses and cars and boats and trips and living a really fun life. He could not have had that working for somebody else.
Yeah.
Because if you rely on somebody else to pay you, you're entirely relying upon that person to not stop paying you.
Yeah.
And they can just do that. You're too old, you're too highly paid, we'll replace you with some young kids. You're out of here. What do I do now? I've spent 25, 30 years in this career, and now they're just replacing me. Well, you relied upon them, and that was a false reliance. So, yes, there's struggle involved. Yes, there's sacrifice involved. But we have the living in a country where you can just go get work. It might not be fun work. It might not be lucrative, but you can get work.
Sure.
So why not pursue the dream? If it's going to allow you to pay the bills, if it goes well, why not go for it? Because the other shit's always there waiting. You can always go back to school. You can always go work at Burger King. It's not going to be a fulfilling life for that time period that you're doing it. But nobody's ever too far from being in that situation anyway. You get laid off from a job, you get injured, whatever. You might be back on that bread line having done all the right things anyway. So why not go for what you really want to do?
And the interesting thing is when you, for example, one of these paths that you can travel is travel. Getting out of the country, even getting out of the state, going somewhere new, setting up a new network. Out of the country when you're an American expatriate, and not the military sense of the word, but just someone who was in the United States is now living abroad. The most broad use of that word. You find that same kind of almost pioneer spirit with the people you interact with when you go to another country and you talk to American expats, which invariably, even though you're going to a new place to explore new people, it's comfortable to talk to other Americans, and you end up doing it regardless. They help you get set up and get into this new network, and it's a great way to do it because these people are just, I don't want to say they're more interesting, because it's not that people are uninteresting in your natural, normal, everyday surroundings, but they always have something different, new, and fascinating to share with you. And that's one of my favorite things, is just comparing notes and talking to people, and whether it's American expatriates or just people traveling in general, or people in these new areas. One of the greatest things that I've had the opportunity to discover is just that it doesn't matter where you go, everyone has those same basic needs. And government, politicians, military, there's so many structures, religion, there's so many structures that force upon us the differences between us and them, between the good guys, the bad guys, the insiders and the outsiders. And it really is just a system of control, because regardless of where you go, regardless of someone's religion, gender, ethnicity, color, build, makeup, education level, whatever it is, when you talk to people, 95, 98, 99% of people have the same basic needs. They want to be comfortable, they want to have family, they want that family to be successful and comfortable, and they want to have food on their table, and they want to have a comfortable place to sleep at night, and to be able to live a meaningful life and do something important. And when you realize that almost everyone on the globe has the same instinct and the same drive, then it's really it takes away the mystique. I mean, a lot of literature and what I focused on with my study of literature is this writing, is this book, novel, movie, play, is it mystifying or demystifying? And I usually find a lot of like young writers, my students in the past, they will try to mystify something to make it seem magical. Like, I'm going to the Orient and there's snakes and fog everywhere and sketchy Asian guys smoking cigarettes, and it's like James Bond or Indiana Jones, that kind of playful mystification. But the best writing, the most meaningful writing in my mind, is things that demystify and allow us to see very clearly this new place or this new thing. And that for me is the most satisfying, is that demystification. I think that's the coolest.
Yeah, I mean, there's this book of idioms that in different languages that we've talked about before. I'm trying to remember the word. I'm going to butcher it terribly because I don't even remember. I think it was called kuroreki in Japanese, which translates to, it specifically describes the light that falls dappled through leaves, like that cool, like spotty light you see on the ground when it's come filtering through trees. And everybody knows what that is, because everybody's seen a tree. It's like, oh yeah, the way it comes and filters through.
I try to describe that in writing. It's super difficult.
Yeah, and the Japanese have a word for that's what it means. That type of light, everybody knows it. And there's this word in Yiddish that means staircase thoughts, which basically means like you think of something cool that you could or should have said earlier in the day as you walk up the staircase to go to bed at night. It's like, oh, everybody knows that. So the human experience is far more similar than different, because you're not going to get two more different, or very few cultures that are more dissimilar than like Yiddish and Japanese. But both of those concepts are instantly recognizable to anybody on Earth. It's like, oh, of course. And so you think of the Japanese, you think of Israeli or Hebrew, you tend to think of things that are completely outside of your experience. There's this great author named Don Winslow, who wrote the two most seminal books I've ever read on the drug war, The Power of the Dog and the sequel, The Cartel. But he's one of those guys, kind of like Louis L'Amour, whose life is almost more interesting than the things they write about. And they're both
Ian Fleming.
Yeah, they're both phenomenal authors. Louis L'Amour skippered a dhow on the Red Sea when he was younger. He was like an elephant wrangler in the circus. He was a lumberjack. He used to roll logs down the river. He was a professional boxer. He was a professional poker dealer. Like, the dude lived a life.
Right.
Don Winslow went to school for like 18th century French literature, put himself through school by being a private investigator in New York in I think it was the 70s. And then he was a fire investigator for the sheriff's department and insurance company for a long time. He lived in Connecticut. He lived in Los Angeles. He lived in Kenya. There's this picture of him and his wife. He's just been visiting Kenya for a long time and really involved with some tribes over there. Him and his wife are standing next to these two really tall, just coal black Kenyan guys. Mm-hmm. And the caption says he knew them both from the time they were young. They grew up to be safari guides. And when they were first getting started, he bought them a couple of camels so they could build into a herd, so they'd have some supplementary income. Right. And he said it blew up way beyond either his or their expectations. And he says there's now something like 400 or 500 camels running around northern Kenya, all named Winslow. That was phenomenal. You know, like that's the kind of story you want to have. And he's only 61 now, so he's not done. He's not dead. He's got more behind him than in front of him. Like that's the kind of life you want to have led when you get to the end of your string. You know, so if you look at your life like a commodity, it's going to end. That's the one thing that you know. I mean, there's this old Irish proverb that says God used to tell men the day and date of their death when they were born. He's like, but then he noticed that none of the fields were getting plowed and no bridges were getting built and it was getting done. So he's like, I'm just going to keep that shit to myself. Right. So the only reason that knowing that life is going to end, the only thing that gives life meaning is what you do with it. The meaning of life is to find meaning for your life. So if trying something new means a risk of your life, you know it's going to end anyway. So why not go out there and try something fun or something cool, something that interests you, as opposed to just punching the clock and just waiting for the weekend and then waking up 40 years later and realizing that you only enjoyed 2 out of every 5 days for 40 fucking years, you know, and there's holidays and the occasional vacation, but it's worth to me a lot of work and sacrifice to get to a point where you enjoy 5 days out of every week as opposed to 2. Yeah. Because what's the alternative? I mean, what if you work really, really hard and you're doing well and you're not doing the job you want to do, but you're doing the right things, and then you're 42 and here comes stage 4 lymphoma.
Yeah, there's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee. So why it makes no sense to not pursue your dreams. Because if you fail, then you can go right back to what everybody else is doing. I think it's Shakespeare, that line, or no, it's not Shakespeare. It's some classic thinker, like the majority of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And it's because you have a family or a job or all these stressors and not enough that makes you happy. And, you know, it's unfortunate that we accrue wisdom as we go and generally through hard-won experience. It'd be nice if we got a little bit of that when we started off. Right. But man, just from seeing what I've seen and doing what I've done and being to the few places that I've been, you know, I'm no world traveler by any stretch. I've been to Canada, Mexico, Dominican Republic, and Italy. That's about it. You know, I haven't even been to, I think, even 10 states here in the U.S. So there's a lot more I want to do. But by working for myself and sacrificing a couple years of my life to just grind really hard, I give myself the opportunity to then be able to coast for the next 60. Right. And that's a much better trade-off than working for 40 years so that you can coast for 10. I mean, it's easy math. And not everybody's as lucky as we are to have an opportunity in a couple of industries where we could make a lot of money in a short amount of time. Generally, if somebody's dream is to be, you know, a pastry chef or something, then you're not going to make a lot of money. But for us, the experiences, you and me, that we want to have require just money for traveling or whatever. We're not very material guys. It's about experiences more than 3 boats. Right. You know, maybe it'd be fun to ride on a boat, but I don't need to own a boat. Right. That's ridiculous.
You have to do all the maintenance,
Yeah, the insurance, the gas, all that stuff. So chartering a boat for a weekend would be super fun. Go to Lake Havasu or Angel Falls in Venezuela or whatever, and like have that experience. That requires money. That's why we work to do what we do, so that we can do that stuff in our 30s as opposed to our 60s. Yeah. And if everything that we do fails and we work really, really hard and it goes away, then we go back to what we were doing before. Like the worst case scenario for what you and I do is the best case scenario for most of the world. Yeah. Like, wow, you get to make more money than you need to buy shit you don't need, to food you don't need. Like that's your worst case scenario. Like, we are super privileged to live at this time in history in this part of the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's an aberration as opposed to the normal. there has not historically been much of a kind of mobile middle class or disposable income. It's been generally subsistent farming,
subsistence level
living.
Existence.
And there's been enough infrastructure to support the top 0.1%, who are the autocrats and the dictators and the kings, and they are kind of at the top organizing all the labor, and it's kind of shifted and skewed in the last 150 years to where there's been that mobility, or at least enough excess to a good number of people can enjoy it. Unfortunately, it's led to industrial production levels which have caused so much strain on the environment and the earth that we are literally killing and poisoning the earth to create enough shit so that people can get their shit,
so that everyone on earth can get fat, basically. It's and you look at what happens when people have more money than they need. What do? They then go looking for stuff to do that satisfies them. You see trust fund babies like generally becoming artists or philanthropists. Like they give the money back, or they just go do something that fulfills them. They don't generally keep working to make more money.
Right.
Money seems to be, in the end, a construct that only has value in what it allows you to do.
Sure.
Felix Dennis has that great line about how the only thing money gives you that's worthwhile is the freedom to spend your time how you wish. All you have is your time here. No matter how rich, no matter how poor, you get 24 hours in a day. How many days you get is entirely arbitrary. So what you do with them is the only thing that matters. So why not do something meaningful?
Right.
And if what gives you meaning is to, like my buddy, just to live in February your whole life, work for the DMV, and never make any more friends than you had in high school, so be it, as long as you're satisfied with that. If you're not, then you're just, the only person you're shortchanging is yourself.
It's like going back to Treme, you've got that character Kermit Ruffins, who is the phenomenal local New Orleans trumpet player, is a local legend. He's nationally recognized and known. He's a real trumpet player. But there's a scene where, again, Davis McAlery says,
Steve Zahn.
Goes, are you telling me all you ever want to do with your life is play the trumpet, get high, and barbecue in New Orleans? And Kermit goes, yeah, man, that'll do. and
it sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah, if that's what you want and you got that, rock on.
Yeah,
power to you. But
very few people fantasize about being janitors. It's still a necessary occupation, but go for it, man. I mean, eat the beignet, buy the motorcycle, take the trip, start the business, whatever it is, because in this country, in this day and age, the worst case scenario is having to work for a living, by and large. If you're privileged enough to have the opportunity to pursue your dreams, you're not born in, a gay black kid with cerebral palsy in inner Baltimore, your options are very limited. Right. If you're not handicapped by the circumstances of your arrival on this planet, you have no excuse to not pursue your dreams. I mean, it's that simple. Carpe the shit out of that diem, man. I mean, the worst case scenario, everybody needs their coffee served every morning. So get out there and do it, man. I don't want to hear you complaining for people who just like, well, I didn't do it. So that's about all I got. I think for this edition of Black Mountain Radio, I'm Daniel Lowber. John Douglas, as always. Rolando, the man behind the wheels of steel. The indefatigable Clark returned the Mariachi Express over at Cashman Center earlier today. A little bit of a debacle over there. But, it's still, the sun is shining. It's a beautiful day. And we get to go out there and pursue our dreams. So life's pretty fucking good. Make it so, people. Make it so.